This podcast is brought to you by the friendly people at Crembo Baked Goods, the San Francisco Bay Area's newest parve non-dairy kosher bakery, proudly serving cookies, loaf cakes, and the best gluten-free challah I've ever had, and much more. Ask about their challah delivery service to schools, organizations, and corporations in the Bay Area. Email them at orders@crembobakedgoods.com for more info, or simply go to Crembo, that's Krembo, bakedgoods.com. Welcome everyone to the Holy Sparks podcast. Saul K here, super excited and grateful for yet another quality guest this morning. And without further ado, let me introduce and edify the woman properly. Rabbi Toba Schaller was born in Wyoming and grew up in small town Texas. Since then, she has lived and worked in Jewish communities big and small all over the country. She is proud of her ability to find a place wherever she lands, be it the busy streets of LA or the honky-tonk of her hometown. She believes that this is a unique gift that helps her build community and helps others find their place too. Rabbi Toba holds an MA in religious education as well as rabbinic ordination from Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. Prior to joining the Hillel at UCLA team, she served as a school rabbi for a pluralistic day school in Milwaukee and as a congregational rabbi-educator. In her very first job, however, she served as engagement fellow for Cornell Hillel and is thrilled to be back serving college students again. Rabbi Baruch Haba'ah, welcome to the Holy Sparks podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. It's officially my first guest position on a podcast.
Oh, amazing. Shehechianu, incredible. Well, I'm really excited to hear your perspective for so many reasons. But before we get into UCLA and Hillel, why don't you talk a little bit about growing up in a small Texas town? Which one was it?
Yeah. So I grew up mostly in a town called Conroe, but I was born in Gillette, Wyoming, and lived there till I was 6, and then lived in Midland, Texas for a while. And then briefly a small town called Willis, where nobody has ever heard of unless you're from Conroe, maybe, because that's the big city nearby. And it was a huge part of my upbringing. I watched my parents build Jewish community in the wilderness and really create and make community and meaningful Judaism wherever they were. And that definitely is part of what led me to the rabbinate.
Wow, so were your parents rabbis or in just community building or?
They just were active lay leaders and presidents of the synagogue, ran the Sunday school, ran the summer camp at the synagogue, and really made an effort to meet Jewish people, even in these rural places. My dad was traumatizing as a teenager, but used to cold call people out of the phone book with Jewish sounding last names and invite them to Shabbat dinner and Seder. So it is no wonder that they raised me up to be a rabbi.
Kavod, that is some next level kiruv, meaning bringing people in. That is incredible. I don't think I've ever heard that except for from one other rabbi. That is amazing grassroots work. Okay, great. Well, that actually naturally leads into my next question, which was did you have a light bulb moment that you wanted to become a rabbi, or with a series of moments or a particular mentor besides your parents, or perhaps it was your parents?
For me, I'm always jealous of the people that knew when they were 14 and just knew forever that that's what they wanted to do. That was not my path at all. I was open to a lot of things. I studied anthropology in school and I taught in the Jewish community, and I worked as a full-time religious school teacher, and I worked in the Bay Area running midrashah retreats, and I did all sorts of community building things. And at some point while I was living in New York City and full-time teaching, I realized I wanted to be the student again. And I thought long and hard about what I wanted to study and how I wanted to study it. And I decided that of all the phases I've ever gone through in my life, Judaism has always been a constant one. I never get tired of learning and studying and thinking about Judaism. And so I decided I wanted to study Judaism, but I wanted to do it from the inside of the community rather than say divinity program somewhere. So I decided rabbinical school was for me. And I didn't really know that everything in my life had led me to rabbinical school until the first year of rabbinical school. I appreciated that there's lots of different kinds of rabbis and that I would get to study for 5 or 6 years. And that's what I was looking forward to. And I wasn't thinking so much about what kind of rabbi I would be. But when I experienced rabbinical school and lived in Israel for the first time, I came out of that experience really realizing that all my life before had led me to that moment. I hadn't realized it, but the rabbinate was the perfect place for me.
There's a famous Steve Jobs quote from this address he gave at a particular college, which says, "You can only understand your life looking backwards, right? You can only connect the dots looking backwards." Beautiful. So I'm wondering how much of that was being in Israel that really cemented that in, or just the learning where you felt like, I'm home. This is really where I'm meant to be.
I think a lot of it was the learning and the community and really realizing that there's a lot of different ways to be a rabbi and that we all have different strengths and skills. And I don't actually have to be the rabbi that I saw growing up. And that there was a space for me and my skills and my passions, whatever they may be, in the rabbinate.
Sweet. So we're here as guest faculty for a couple weeks at Camp Newman in California. And I was curious, did you go to Jewish summer camp growing up?
I did. Shout out to Green Family Camp. Not only did I go to Green Family Camp and work at Green Family Camp, I got married at Green Family Camp in a camp themed wedding that included a family talent show. So I am a camp person through and through, and so fun to be back as faculty now.
Wow, I love it. I don't know if I've ever met anyone that was married at camp.
There's a club of us.
There's a little Facebook group. Oh, that's so fun. Okay, so talk a little bit about coming back to Hillel at UCLA. Why Hillel and why UCLA?
I wasn't looking to change jobs. I was working as the rabbi in a small community day school in Milwaukee, and I really loved that form of the rabbinate. Teaching has always been such a big part of what I do and what I love. And so I've always been in educational roles, and I love children, and I love being really helping people connect to Judaism in different ways. In congregational life, they don't look at you quite the same when you run across the gym screaming, "I love being Jewish." In Jewish day school context, that totally fits and is really fun and everyone likes it. So a lot of day school and working with kids really just fit my personality and I really liked. So really the UCLA gig fell in my lap, and a friend of mine was leaving UCLA to go to another role. And she called and said, "You should move to LA and take this job. It is perfect for you. And you would really love it." And I was like, I have a house, I have a life, I have a husband, I have kids. We're in Milwaukee, we're settled. And she called me another time and said, just talk to the executive director, just talk to him, just have a conversation. And I had a conversation with him. And at the same time, behind the scenes, was talking to my husband about what it would look like for our family to live in LA and what it would mean for us. And then I talked to the executive director, and then it was such an enjoyable conversation. It was so fun to think about what the work of Hillel is. And then I talked to the students. And after I had my interview with the students, I wanted the job so badly that it didn't matter. And I felt so lucky to be chosen and was so happy. And it's been the greatest thrill of my life and the biggest honor to serve at UCLA. It is so much fun and just the best place.
So sweet. So the students interviewed you. Students had to
Students
buy
interviewed me for my second
it.
round, which is what is so amazing about Hillel.
Yeah.
Uh, I tease them that like my job is a lot of times like explaining how something relates to Judaism and signing the receipts for reimbursement, and really the students do the work. And on some level, it is true and that's what's so fun.
For the people that are listening to this podcast that aren't as familiar with Hillel as like an umbrella organization, just give us a couple minutes on it in terms of pluralistic Jewish perspective, and anything else one might need to know.
So Hillel is an international organization that supports Jewish life on college campuses. There is an umbrella Hillel that supports individual nonprofits and individual Hillel institutions near universities in all over North America, a little bit in Europe. And we bring people together to experience, to learn, to connect to Judaism in a pluralistic way, and are the only place on campus that really invests in pluralistic Judaism. So we bring together students who grew up Orthodox and went to Jewish day school in Los Angeles, and everyone they know has a similar story, with students who grew up coming to Camp Newman and living in the woods or some other place. And what's really special about Hillel is that there is no hierarchy of the Judaism. Our goal is to connect students and help them be leaders and help them connect to their own Judaism in a myriad of ways. And it's not so much to serve a version of Judaism. We have great partners, and there are other organizations on campus who are very welcoming to a variety of Jewish students, but offer one specific sort of flavor and version of Judaism. And Hillel offers everything across the spectrum, a million ways. Whatever students are excited to learn about and get involved in, Hillel's there to support them, create and make space for them to do that in community.
Sweet, that is great. That must be very interesting depending on the size of any particular Hillel when it comes to, okay, Shabbat's coming up. What type of service are we going to have? Right? There must be a lot of interesting discussions to navigate it.
Well, we, I think, are unique. Not all schools have really big populations of Jews from all sorts of different communities and backgrounds. So a lot of schools are mostly serving a population on sort of one end of the Jewish spectrum. And that is so much easier. The greatest challenge that we have at UCLA is that we have a huge Persian population. We have a huge Orthodox Ashkenazi population. We have a ton of students who live at home and a ton who have come from far away. And we just really have diversity and work hard to find ways to create meaningful Judaism across that spectrum.
It's amazing. I love it. I really do feel at a core level we live in a pluralistic Jewish universe, at least in this country and in most countries. So it's a nice reflection of that.
College is a time for exploring and learning and seeing how other people do things, and the idea that there's one Judaism feels so untrue to me, that I feel really honored and proud to get to connect students to so many different kinds and aspects of Judaism and show them new different ways to be Jewish.
Sweet. Okay, so I want to transition a little bit. UCLA has been in the news a lot over the last several months, although being at camp, I haven't watched news for a couple of weeks, which I highly recommend. But prior to that, both being a student on UC Berkeley campus and an activist and a Jewish leader, I was definitely involved in trying to help wherever I can, college students specifically. And so if one had not been to UCLA or been on campus, one would really think, like, with all of the encampments and the violence, like it was just apocalyptic, horrible situation. So I wanted to ask you a few questions about that because you were there on the ground. And so, the first question really is sort of on a personal level. What's been your personal experience there on campus? Have you experienced anti-Semitism, and do you feel safe on campus?
So I absolutely feel safe on campus, but my experience as a rabbi on campus is so different from a student experience on campus. So I don't know. I don't know that many students worry for their physical safety. I think there are some. I know what I have worried about for the students of UCLA is their emotional safety, that I think emotionally what they have had to carry in the last year is really, really heavy, uh, and hard for them. I think a lot of the anti-Semitism, we had a really sweet neighbor call up and say, I teach Krav Maga at the JCC. Can I teach Krav Maga classes for the Hillel students so that they feel safe on campus? And I was like, yes, absolutely. But the safety that they need on campus that they're going to get from Krav Maga is not actually physical fighting skills. It's the community and the physical activity that is so necessary, and the conversations that will come up during Krav Maga class more than the physical safety. I think I felt very confident, and from what we understood from our partners in law enforcement, that safety wasn't that our safety wasn't our physical safety wasn't compromised when we were not at the site of the physical protests. So at the encampment, there was some physical violence. 2 blocks away from the encampment, if you were not a Jewish student or a student who was particularly invested in politics, there were times that you wouldn't have known that 3 blocks away there was all of this drama and controversy going on. At the same time, there were points, several points, where the helicopters and the police sirens, and there was an intensity in the air that I think was hard for anyone and everyone to deal with. And I know I personally, just after 2 days of the constant helicopters and sirens, my nervous system was so out of it. And I felt so grateful to go home to my quiet apartment in a different part of town. And so many students went back to their apartment buildings where they could still hear the protests, where they could hear their friends and neighbors talking about things that they didn't want to talk about in that time, or that were hurtful or harmful. And so the emotional safety and the emotional trauma that everybody had to deal with was really immense.
Yeah. Okay. So several things around that. I was just looking up. UCLA has about maybe 33,000 students. Is that about right? Yeah. So figure 1% is actually involved. What's going on? Maybe 2%, maybe 600 kids. I mean, is that, my experience at UC Berkeley, there's 45,000 students there. Okay. It's a
Yeah.
huge, huge school, but maybe 500 kids are even know enough about it and are actually involved in either being in the encampments or whatever in terms of actively, meaning there's a 95% of the rest of school that could care less. They literally could care less, or they don't even know, or they're like often just being college kids and throwing pies in each other's faces, or being, having fun, playing frisbee. So is that your experience? Does that sound accurate?
In a lot of ways, absolutely. Though there were points when the protests got very big and felt like there were thousands of people there. At the same time, from my perspective, it felt clear that in those moments that was a gathering of a lot of students who were looking to support Palestinians, not necessarily the BDS or the encampment or the same level of sort of anti-Semitic Israel hate in other places. But I think it was confusing and hard to sometimes draw that line and differentiate. And so I think a lot of students felt really scared seeing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students gathered in a rally to support the encampment or to support Palestinians. And the other thing I think students had to deal with at UCLA, and I don't know what it was like on other campuses, is that online, every student group decided to make a statement, and every statement was drawn from a BDS example. And so,
Just,
all of a sudden,
I think it's useful in case someone hears BDS, they don't know what that means. Just explain real quick. What does that mean? Yeah.
so I understand BDS as a movement to boycott, divest, and sanction from Israel. As a campus professional, I struggle with the not the idea that people should be boycotting one country in order to support what they believe in, but a huge element of the way the BDS movement works is that they seek to non-normalize interactions with Zionists, which means that in some cases, as an organization, they have called for boycotting Jewish organizations on campus, or Hillels, or study abroad programs in Israel, or things that we feel are really valuable to the conversation and to students and to other aspects of Jewish life. And BDS, from the Hillel perspective, really shuts down conversation and excludes a lot of the Jewish community from important conversations that we want to be in. So Hillel has a anti-BDS stance.
Interesting. Well, I'm glad to hear that, number one.
Yeah.
Number two, does Hillel as a movement have like a statement about the war in Israel right now? Because I know some organizations like the URJ has like a statement, and does Hillel have something like that, or is it a general philosophy out of curiosity?
So we have the overriding mission, and we identify as a Zionist organization in that we believe as an institutional organization that Hillel has a right to exist.
I think you meant to say that Israel has a right to exist. You
Israel
said
does have a right to
Hillel
exist.
also has a right to exist. Okay.
Um, and Hillel does have policy that we don't bring speakers that endorse BDS, and we don't bring speakers that on any side in any part of the Israel conversation endorse violence to either side or extremist, what we understand as extremist positions.
Great, good to hear. Now, here's a question for you, and maybe this is something you do within Hillel. There's a group called Stand With Us that does a lot of training on how to deal with the talking points, how to deal with all of the anti-Semitic libels that, Israel's committing genocide and that it's an apartheid state and then all these other lies about Israel and Jews. And they train kids on how to engage in people that are actually wanting to have conversations around that. Is that something that is part of what Hillel does, or is that something that you guys do down there?
So we work with Stand With Us in the way that our missions align and intersect in some ways, in that we are both trying to support Jewish student leadership. So the Stand With Us interns at UCLA are not part of the UCLA. We don't have a say in who they are, and we're not involved in the process. But once they go through training with Stand With Us, we very regularly invite them to use Hillel Space or to co-sponsor programs. The reality is that very often the students who work with Stand With Us are also involved in Hillel things in other ways. And so there ends up being a really natural overlap. But we don't we co-sponsor things all the time. We work together all the time. We're not officially, formally connected.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking more in terms of how they train. I think training leaders is super important, but
Yeah.
giving kids language, like,
Yeah.
hey, here's some things you're going to hear. Here's some things to think about that, and maybe here's some possible responses or some ways to debunk these myths so that they have the intellectual tools to deal with those situations. Because a lot of times kids, they're just scared. They don't know, maybe they don't know where they stand, or they don't have the information, or they don't have enough Israel education to even make a decision,
Yeah.
which,
Well, and then all of a sudden they're on the spot, and every person on campus wants to know what they think about Israel. And I think those resources are really helpful. Stand With Us is one of them. There are others. Hillel International gives us curriculum. We have an Israel fellow through the Jewish Agency to do programs and things like that. I think one of the challenges is I think it is very helpful in helping students clarify for themselves where they stand and what they think and where the controversy is and what's going on. I think often the challenges that students face is that people don't actually want to dialogue with them about
yeah.
the history of Israel, and that when they do, if they do, they have been trained with a different perspective. And so for every fact and every historical argument that Stand With Us teaches students to make, somebody is teaching students from the other perspective to argue back with that, unfortunately. I think it is really helpful for a piece. I think the other challenge is that so often the anti-Semitism and the interactions that students are dealing with are these small, subtle social things that facts about Israel aren't going to help when everyone rolls their eyes at you when you suggest that the statement that they're putting out in your student club isn't exactly the case and will alienate Jewish community members, and or not being invited back to the next meeting. Those are the kinds of things that I think a lot of students are facing, and or they're facing really difficult power dynamics where it's not their friend who wants to debate Israel, it's the TA of their art history class who is suddenly offering a lecture about this. And unfortunately, like, we need more tools to help students in those situations, because facts about Israel really give us confidence and help us understand it makes sense, but don't always do all that needs to be done.
Yes, I was in as a student, a class at UC Berkeley this last semester. It was the modern Middle East. And, I'm slightly older than some of the kids there. When it came to Israel, like I was the voice of here are some facts that are actual facts, and what you're saying is actually not true. And here are some things you're leaving out, like in the creation of the state of Israel, this little thing called the Holocaust played into that, and that was kind of like left out of the discussion. But none of the other Jewish kids, whom I knew them all, my class, stood up to speak. And I think partially, they were just scared, intimidated, class culture. And then the second part is not having enough information education on their side, right? So I think the greater the education, the more confident these kids will be. And even if they're not speaking up, at least they're going to have their own internal compass. Okay, so a couple other questions. Now, one of the things that was on the news a lot were these blockades. I think this was at UCLA's campus where kids weren't allowed, or maybe even professors, to go to their classes. Is that something that, I mean, did you experience that? Is that still happening? What are the resolution of that?
So classes are over now, so I'm sure it's not still happening. The height of it was when the first encampment was built. There have been two other sort of encampments since the original one. When the original one was at its height, students from the encampment created barriers around in a wide area around the encampment and prevented students from going through there and having access. There was one point where they did take over the entrance to the library, and the administration ultimately, I believe, closed the library down. But I think on one hand, yes, students were prevented from having access to every space on their campus, on their institution that they are paying dues and taxes or fees and taxes to be a part of. I think on the other hand, the videos that you saw of UCLA were not of students trying to get into public areas. Those were students trying to get into the encampment. There's one specific UCLA student that was shown a lot, and he was trying to get into the encampment. He wasn't trying to get to class, and they knew that, and he knew that. I think the message that many people read from that is that the encampment was growing and keeping people from getting to their classes or getting to campus or being on campus at all. And I don't think that's really the truth of it. I think in 2024, do you need to go to the library, or do you want to go to the library? Or also, when I was in college, we didn't have the internet. So we had to go to the library. Nowadays, students want to go to the library. I know that there were students with disabilities who were very much prevented from having access to the spaces that they needed to get to. And the university worked with them to find solutions, but there were several days where students couldn't get to classes if they had mobility issues. And
Okay.
then there were some days, there were teachers who took their classes, students who, as part of their class, were to go into the encampment. And for Jewish students, there were many who didn't feel safe and didn't feel comfortable
Wait a
in those.
second. Teachers who our lecture today is going to be going to the encampment? Oh, wow. Interesting. What class was that?
I believe it was, I I have heard many different reports from students, so I can't verify all of them. But one that I heard a lot was like 60s politics course. But a lot of other students felt like they were being encouraged or incentivized to engage in supporting the protest and felt uncomfortable and upset. And a lot of students felt like classes that had nothing to do with Israel in any way or protest or were commandeered and suddenly became a lecture, a one-sided lecture from someone who may or may not have had a lot of background and information on what was going on in Israel.
Yeah, so interesting. I did some research on all of the funds that have come into the UC and college system in general, and something like $5 or $6 billion over the last 20 years has come from Qatar and other Arab countries. And I always wonder, how that has influenced things or professors or organizations or, okay, where does that money go? Any thoughts about that?
I don't know. I don't, my interactions with campus are not the same as someone on who is a faculty member or in the administration and really sees campus life. I'm always sort of a guest on campus when I visit. I will say that I think everyone felt very strongly at every point of this protest. It feels dangerous to say everyone, but felt like there were outside groups and outside organizations and outside people who were getting very involved, not for the benefit of anyone. I think most of the student conversation that I was a part of was not about Qatar, but was about outside protesters and outside organizations and non-student
Right. I was
people.
going to ask you how many of the people there were from outside, and yeah, I think it's a good percentage.
Yeah, it was hard to know, and I wasn't ever able to go inside the encampment as a Hillel professional. I was not able to have access.
Meaning
Though I'm
like,
sure
meaning you were encouraged to not go, or you actually wanted to go to try to get in, and they didn't
I
let you.
wanted to go and try and get in,
Oh, and they didn't let you in.
and they didn't let me in. Yeah.
How did it come up were you wearing a name tag or something, or how did?
No, I was really clear about who I was and why I was there. And we had a traumatic incident at UCLA. One of the moments that people saw on the news that were really scary and harmful for our entire community is when a group of non-campus affiliated counter protesters from the Jewish community showed up in the middle of the night and created a situation of harm and violence for everybody. And I think it was harmful for campus and it was harmful for students. And it and many students on campus were very worried about how it made the Jewish community look and how it made other Jewish students feel. And so as the progressive rabbi on campus, I wanted to talk to the Jewish students who were in there because I know there are Jewish students who are protesting, and I know there are Jewish students who are anti-Israel, and I see serving them as part of my bigger role. And as the Reform rabbi, I come from a community that really emphasizes civil disobedience and protest, and I come from a tradition that elevates standing up for what you believe in. And so whether or not the protest was something I believed in or agreed with, when the Jewish community was not appropriately counter protesting, I wanted to remind the Jewish students who were in the encampment that there still is a place for them in Jewish community and the whole Jewish world isn't against them, even though it sometimes feels that way. And I'm hoping to create spaces for more dialogue. And I come from a place where obviously I believe in Palestinian rights and a Palestinian state. That's growing up in Reform Judaism, that was always taught to me. We were two-state solution my whole life in the movement. So I want to create places where we can talk about how to support Palestinians and Jews. The challenge of the current moment is that it has felt like the only way to support Palestinians has been to support and get involved with BDS and Hamas, which is hard. And yeah.
Okay, so quick sidebar, but it's definitely a main bar. It's a
Yeah.
fun expression. Um, okay, so two-state solution, just real quick. So my whole life growing up, I'm like, yeah, two-state solution is going to be great. This is the natural cause of this is what we need to do. And my brother, who lived in Israel, and I have many families that live in Israel, have lived there for many, many years. He's like, I hear what you're saying, but every time we give more land, they just bring the terror closer. I'm like, I don't believe that. And then after October 7th, I was like, oh, well, let's look at Gaza. Let's see. Israel left Gaza 2005, and look what was created, a terror state, right? So here's my question to you. How is it going to be any different? If the state was created right now, how is it going to be any different?
I don't know. And I feel really lucky to be a rabbi and not a politician. And that isn't my primary job. But what I do feel really sure and confident about is that the answer isn't going to come from screaming at each other across aisles. It's going to come from dialogue and conversation. And I think ultimately like my job as a rabbi is to remind all of us and to stay myself in a place that really elevates humanity and people's needs over alliances and governments. And so I want to have conversations with Jewish people about people and what people need and how to support them in that.
Great answer. Okay, so we're in the summer break, we're in the camp bubble, we're in this really sweet, safe space where we get to take a break from news and all that. But in a few months here, we'll be going back to school. Some people will be going back to school, you'll be going back to UCLA. What is your vision for this year in terms of offering support? And if there's a student or a parent listening to this that has a kid at UCLA, what can they expect support-wise from Hillel? Anything different or additional?
Yeah. So who knows what next year. This is uncharted territory for all of us. October 7th changed things for everyone, and we're all still figuring out what that means and what that looks like. On some level, I think the job of Hillel hasn't changed at all. Hillel's job was always to help students find meaning, connection, community, and that just becomes our even more important than ever before. I know in my Hillel, one of the things that I've learned over the course of the years that we really need to make space and emphasize joy and celebration, that there's so much to drag us down and there's so much weight in the world and everything right now that we really need to invest in joy and celebrating our Judaism. And I think for students, what's important to remember is that they get a choice in how they engage. This is a conversation, this is a discussion, this is a debate on campus, and you do have control in how you engage with it, so that students who feel powerful and feel interested in learning more by counter protesting, by engaging in pro-Israel advocacy, if that fills your cup and makes you feel like you are having an impact, then Hillel has a ton of ways to do that. If you want to debate Israeli politics, Hillel has a place to do that from all perspectives too. And you also have a right to say, Israel is not my focus right now, and I have other interests in Judaism or other priorities in school and life, and know that the Jewish community is backing you up, and the Jewish community that we are working on this as a community. And it's not up to our college students to defend Israel, reject Israel, define what will bring peace to the Middle East. Their ultimate job is to go to school. And so we're here with food, with reminders, with spirituality, and mostly with ways to fill their cup so that they have the space to take on the extra pressure that this has created.
Sweet. I love it. It's like you get to choose your own adventure, but really pick your lane. And I
Yeah.
think like a lot of us, we thought this would be over much sooner, right? The whole the golden era of Judaism in the world, the last 7 years is over, and we're in a different era now. And so this is a marathon, not a sprint. So it's really important to develop tools to take care of ourselves and our community. And It's one of the reasons why I'm teaching meditation here on I was going to say on campus, at camp, on the campus, to just give more spiritual tools for people. On that note, really quickly, one of the things that I was happy to help facilitate is at UC Berkeley, there has mental health resources for all these different focus groups, and there was nothing for Jewish students. And so I encouraged them very strongly to do that, which they did. So now they can get free therapy. There's all these resources. Does UCLA have something like that? Is that easy to find on a website? Anything like that?
Absolutely. And Hillel, I will say, so we have CAPS, which is the university official, and they offer groups for Jewish students, and they offer mental health resources and support and doctors. We also have a really lovely special relationship with Jewish Family Services in LA. And through a grant from Federation, we are able to connect students directly to Jewish therapists who have training in Jewish community needs, and who can provide ongoing care for college students for free. And we're so lucky to be in LA, so they can go to Pico Robertson offices and see a therapist in real life, or they can do it virtually from anywhere on campus. So we have really, really great resources.
Amazing. That's so important. Okay, so wrapping up here. First of all, thank you for your time. I know you're busy, you got a lot going on. The question I always ask everyone that's on the Holy Sparks podcast is this: what does the Jewish world need now most, and why?
So I'm going to answer specifically for the college students in the world. I think they need to be seen and heard. I think that so much of what has been going on for Jewish college students is they feel there is no place where they get to be true and honest, where people aren't going to roll their eyes at them or assume that they are in one position or another. And students really need a place to be seen and heard. I think also one of the challenges that college students have faced in the last year is that what is happening on college campuses isn't exactly what you see in TikTok and in the media. And they're carrying a lot of weight and a lot of worry and a lot of fear from their parents and grandparents and rabbis and community members. And so I think what Jewish students need is some love and some care, and some need their grown-ups to find their own spiritual outlets and their own ways to deal with this, so that students aren't having to carry all of their own and their families and ours at the same time.
I love it. Well, Rabbi Toba, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I always want to end every podcast with a blessing. So Hashem should bless you that you are able to stay in your lane, which from what I can feel is loving compassion and just loving on students, giving them a space to be themselves in whatever lane, in whatever way is most supportive to them. And that the work that you're doing is so important for a generation that just desperately needs mentorship, it desperately needs to be seen, like every generation, but certainly now more than ever. And that they're carrying so many people's expectations and worries and fears, and that you can be a bridge for them to just have a college experience and have a productive and supported Jewish experience. And I look forward to being in touch with you very soon. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, all.